Okay, this is the first class, which is basically on human body and homeostasis. So I'm going to talk about how human body works, like how human body is divided into multiple organ systems to understand that better, because this class is on human anatomy and physiology. So to understand the word anatomy, we have to understand the word physiology, and we have to understand all the body systems that are involved. And then we are going to talk about homeostasis, and we are going to talk about the feedback mechanism of the homeostasis, and then we are going to go into the directional terminology and more detail. Okay, so let me get the PowerPoint first, and then we can talk from there. So let me share the PowerPoint with you guys. Okay, so human anatomy and physiology, this is what we are going to study. So when you study human, we first need to know what is human. So human, is it a living things or a non-living things? Like what is the difference between me and let's say for with this marker? So there must be some difference because this is considered as non-living and I'm considered as living. So the difference belongs to this. That means it organization, responsiveness, movement, growth, differentiation, reproduction, metabolism, and excretion. These are the difference, meaning these are the characteristics that goes with the living things, not with the non-living things. Like what does that mean? Living things are very organized, meaning, for example, our body, if we take like we know the human body, their unit of body is cell, but we can break open a cell. So if we break open a cell, we get organelles. I'm sure you learn in biology class. And then if you break open an organelle, you get chemicals, such as like molecules, like different type of molecules. So initially you get large molecules like polysaccharide, lipid, and protein. But then if you break them down, you get small molecule. And then if you break a molecule, you get atoms. Now, can we break an atom? Yes, we can. But for biology, for our purpose, we can stop at atoms. So in other words, our body is organized as atoms and molecules. Together, they make organelles. Together, some organelles make a cell. Then we have millions and trillions of cells. Actually, human body is like last 10 years of research showed us like approximately a human body has approximately 37.4 trillion cells. So many cells, we put them in a group. So cells then make together tissues. Those group of cells called tissues. And then tissue make organ system. Tissue makes organs. So then a couple of tissue together make some organs. And the organs, when multiple organs working together, we call organ system. And then organ system become organism. So this is our organization. So our organization from a lower level to the higher level is, I think we have a slide right there. We can go understand this one. So we have chemicals, atoms and molecules. That's the lowest level of organization. Then together they would not go into the cell right here. What is missing is organelles. So chemicals together make organelles. When you take a note, please make sure write the word organelles right here. Then multiple organelles together make cell. In this case, they're giving a picture of a muscle cell. Then cells make tissues. So now the question is, what is tissue? So I have a slide later on, but I'm going to make the definition right here. Tissues are a group of cells that has some similar functions. So a group of cells with similar functions called tissues. Now, human body, we have trillions of cells. As I mentioned earlier, 37.4 trillion cells. But when you're grouping them, we only group them in 4 types of tissues, only 4 types of tissues. They are called epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, and muscular tissue. Again, I have another slide for that later on. So epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, muscular tissue. Right now, you just need to know the name of those 4 tissues and the definition of tissue. Definition of tissue is, again, the group of cells that have similar functions. Not identical function, similar functions. Then those tissues, couple of them together, can make an organ. So organs such as this is a blood vessel, organ could be heart, could be lung, pancreas, gallbladder, so many organs in your body. And then sometimes, for example, in this example, blood vessel and heart, they're functioning together. So they create a organ system. And then for example, this particular organ system that they have created is called cardiovascular system or circulatory system. It could be nervous system, it could be muscle system, muscular system, it could be integumentary system, it could be endocrine system, and so on. So human body has 11 organ systems. Again, 11 organ systems. And then together we make the human or organism. So we can consider this is the lowest level of organization, atoms and molecules. Organelle, cell, tissue, organ, and organ system. At the end, organism is the highest level of organization. So I can, just to give you an example, I can ask you questions such as simple as this, like muscle and calcium, which one is the lower level of organization? Muscle and calcium. So you have to say muscle is a tissue type. And the calcium is a molecule or atom. Calcium is an atom. So we can say calcium is a lower level of organization, excuse me. Or I can ask you cardiovascular system or liver. Which one is the higher level of organization? Again, liver is an organ and cardiovascular system is an organ system. So obviously cardiovascular system will be the higher level of organization. So you need to know this chart. That's the first thing you do. Okay, let's go back. Excuse me. So human being a living system, living things, one characteristic is they are organized, and we know exactly how they are organized. We started with chemistry to cell to tissue to organ system level. They are responsive, meaning we are responsive. So for example, if I go outside and if it is raining, and I'm definitely going to look for a shade or an umbrella, like, going to, or if it is extremely hot outside, I'm going to look for something for cool, or I'll open my jacket. That's a response. But if I throw this pen outside from the window, whether it is rain or shine, this pen is not going to look for any shade or any umbrella or moving jacket or whatsoever, meaning this is not going to react to the nearest or immediate environmental changes. And as a living things, we are going to react to the environmental changes. That's a characteristics. Movement, I don't think I have to explain that much, like it's a locomotion, or even the movement inside your body, like when the food moves, called peristalsis, when your blood moves throughout the body, all these things happening inside the body. Growth and differentiation, very important. Growth means we all start, like for example, sperm fertilize an egg that create a zygote. So from one cell, then we have two cells, two become four, four become eight, eight become 16, 16 become 32, and so on. Now we have trillions of cells, like as I mentioned, 37.4 trillion cells. So we grow. So living things, including humans, we grow. Understand that. What is differentiation? Differentiation means although all cells, this is important to understand, although 37 trillion cells came from one single cell, but now my skin cell is different than my eye, then my eye cells are different than my brain cells, the brain cells is different than the liver cells and lung cells, and so far. So far, all the cells are different. Like, why? That means although they came from the same source, but eventually their functionality is different. Okay, so in other words, genetically, like if you consider a little bit biology here, if we consider the DNA inside the cell, yes, they are identical in all cells. That if I take a cell from eye, if I take a cell from my lung, if I take a cell from my liver, if I take a cell from my skin, all these cells that I just mentioned, their DNA is going to be the same. Their DNA is identical. So what is different? Because within the DNA, let's say hypothetically, each cell has 100 of genes. Okay, out of those 100, in some cells, some genes are working, the others are turned off. In other cells, some others are working, the other group is turned off. So everybody, every cell will have a different function. That's differentiation. That's differentiation. So I'll give another example to understand it. So let's say I'm teaching 24 students right now, okay? So in our class, all 24 are there. Everybody is learning A&P, but not everybody is going to become a nurse. Somebody is going to become a nurse. Somebody is going to become a doctor. Somebody is going to become a physician assistant. Somebody is going to become an OT. Somebody is going to become a dental hygienist. Somebody is going to dentist, and so on. So all we started together, but then functionally they're all different. That's our cells. So human, our cells, because we are multicellular organism, we differentiate. Not only we grow, but also we differentiate. Reproduction, which is one of the most important characteristics of living things, because non-living things cannot reproduce. This pen is not going to produce another pen, but human can produce another human. So like many other living things, we reproduce. So reproduction is a characteristic. Reproduction means production of the new or next generation or next offspring. Metabolism and excretion. Metabolism meaning to do all this work, so we need energy. And we are unlike plant cell, we cannot make our own energy. So we need to consume food from outside. So when you consume food, we break them down. Those reactions together, we call every single reaction in your body together called metabolism. And obviously when you cook in the kitchen, you have a trash. Same thing here. When you cook for our body, we produce a lot of waste. Those are required excretion, meaning you have to get rid of the waste from the body. This is your basis of the body chemistry, meaning when you understand human as a living thing, why we are living, what is the difference between this pen and I, these are the differences. So I can organize, I can be responsive, like adaptation, or I can be irritated, I produce movements, I have the growth and differentiation, I can reproduce, and I need metabolism and excretion. Okay, so make sure that you know individually all of that. Then obviously organization, we talked about a little bit more. So the lowest level is chemical level. Then we have cell, tissue, organ system, and organism. Actually, our A&P, if you understand this, our A&P, the whole A&P 1 course, I can explain right from there. So basically how a whole A&P course is like A&P 1 and 2 is continuing. This is how. So first we learn a little bit of chemistry. Okay, without knowing chemistry, you cannot learn cell and their work very well. So we have to learn a little bit of chemistry. So in next chapter, I'm going to talk about a little bit of inorganic chemistry, a little bit of organic chemistry. Then comes cell. So I'm going to talk about cell, organelle, and their function. Then come tissue. So we are going to talk about those tissues, epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nerve tissue. And then come organ system. So the question is, how many organ systems? We have 11 organ systems. Right now, you have to know all the names, but not all the organ system in the syllabus. In A&P 1, we are going to learn only 4 organ systems. And then in A&P 2, we are going to learn the other 7. So A&P 1, we are going to focus on integumentary system, skeletal system, muscular system, and nervous system. So we are going to learn about skeletal system, integumentary first, and then a skeletal system, then muscular system, and then nervous system. These are the only 4 in A&P 1. The rest, all 7, are going to be in the A&P 2. We talked about this particular slide. I explained what is the chemistry level or the cellular level, what is the tissue, what is the group of tissue, what are these 4 tissue types. We talked about organ level, we talked about organ system level, okay? We talked about organism level. So make sure you go through individually and then read the book at this point so that you have to understand it. Remember, this is a science class. You got to understand. So next is, what is anatomy? What is physiology? Before we go to the 11 organ system, these are the 2 basic names we should know. Anatomy is the study of structure. It came from like a Greek word, an old word called cutting open. Okay, so when you study the structure is the anatomy. When you study the function is physiology. When you study structure, so if I take a body, like if you look at my body, if you look at the structure, like how the human body looks like, that's anatomy. And how it functions, that physiology, okay? So now anatomy can be multiple types, okay? First of all, anatomy can be divided into 2 halves, gross anatomy or macro anatomy and microscopic anatomy. So these are the organ system. I'm coming back later on. Okay, just I'm going to skip a few slides. I'm going to come here and then I'm going to go back there. So gross anatomy or macroscopic anatomy, and when you do, what does that mean? So one more time, anatomy divided into two groups: gross anatomy or macroscopic anatomy, and the other one is microscopic anatomy. Macroscopic, gross anatomy means you are doing with your naked eye. Microscopic anatomy means when you are studying the structure with the help of a microscope. First, understand the difference one more time. The anatomy can be in two groups: gross or macroscopic. Macro means big, and microscopic anatomy. So macro means just to the naked eye. Like right now, let's say you are studying this body. So you're looking at right here, the surfaces, all these things. These are gross anatomy you're studying. You're looking at a model, that's gross anatomy. But if I take out a microscope to see a thing that my naked eye cannot see, so I'm looking into a cell, looking into a tissue, that's microscopic anatomy. Okay. Now, gross anatomy can be also subdivided into multiple ways. Like we can classify it a little bit more. So out of that three, I want you to know those are the three listed on this PowerPoint. It's called surface anatomy, regional anatomy, and systemic anatomy. Surface anatomy, meaning you're looking at the surface. So if you're looking at the surface here, you're looking at the surface, or if you when you cut open, let's say you cut open here, you take out my heart and looking at the surface of the heart, that will be surface anatomy. Like you're just looking at the surface of the heart. Regional anatomy, let's say you're talking about thoracic region right here, or you're talking about right here, the cranial region, or talking about facial region, talking about abdominal region, and so on. So those are regional anatomy. Systemic anatomy, obviously, we have 11 organ systems. We were looking at the anatomy of cardiovascular system. We're looking at the anatomy of the respiratory system. We're looking at the anatomy of the excretory system, and so on. So that's systemic anatomy. Okay. There are more, as I said, you don't need to know those details right now. For example, just to get you an idea what it is, like let's say developmental anatomy, meaning when you're born and right now we are not same, our anatomical structure changes. Even if you go back into the mother's body, the embryological anatomy or fetal anatomy means the changes in there. Or we can call it like clinical anatomy. For example, so you have a bump here, and to show that bump, you go to a doctor. So that anatomical changes we can refer to as a clinical anatomy, and so on. But by the way, you should know surface anatomy, regional anatomy, and systemic anatomy, and of course, the definition of gross anatomy. Macroscopic, meaning with the microscope. Microscopic means with the microscope. Now, when you're looking at a microscopic anatomy, pay attention, this is very simple. Either you're looking at a cell or you're looking at a group of cells, which is tissue. So if you're looking at a cell, you're looking at one single cell, we call that cytology. So study of cell, cytology. This is what cyte, C-Y-T, cyte means cell. So study of cell, cytology. And cell is the fundamental unit of life. Because remember, from atoms and molecules, we get the organelles. Organelles become the cell. Why cell is considered as the fundamental unit of life? Because cell can reproduce. Atoms and molecules cannot reproduce. Organelles, most organelles cannot reproduce. Okay, there are a couple of exceptions, but most of them cannot reproduce. So we cannot consider this as a fundamental unit of life. The fundamental unit of life is the cell which can reproduce and can do all the other functions. So our body, technically speaking, is a community of cells. Because what I can't do, my cells can't do that. Okay. On the other hand, histology is the study of tissue. So when you are examining a tissue under the microscope, meaning what is tissue again? Group of cells. So when you're studying a group of cells that has similar function under the microscope, that's called histology. So anatomy, the study of structure, can be divided into gross anatomy and microscopic anatomy. Gross could be multiple different types depending on what are you looking at, but all of them are same as far as the device is concerned, meaning you're not using any device, you're just using your naked eye. Microscopic anatomy, on the other hand, two types, cytology and histology. Cytology is a study of cell, histology is the study of tissue. Now let's go back a little bit temporarily before we go to physiology. We have 11 organ system. Now this is important. Those 11 organ system at right now, this time you're supposed to know all the 11 names. You do not need this detail. So what I did, I created a slide to give you like few lines. So what I would like you to do, I would like you to write down all the 11 organ system name in one place and memorize that, but read them one or twice just to get an idea. So I'm not going to ask a question like, what is this? Or I'm not going to ask you a question like, what is long-term changes right now? Or I'm not going to ask you a question, what is the function of a skeletal system? So those we are going to learn later on. Right now we are going to know the 11 organ systems are like neural system or nervous system, endocrine system, muscular system, skeletal system, cardiovascular or circulatory system, integumentary system, but you don't need to know what makes integumentary system. You do not need to know right now. Lymphatic or immune system, respiratory system, digestive system, urinary system, and finally reproductive system. Again, detail not required, just 11 organ system name. That's good enough for now. Physiology. So physiology is the study of function. So when you study function, obviously you can study the function of the cell. So we can call cell physiology. So now we can study, for example, function of an organ. We can call organismic physiology or specialized physiology. So we are looking at the function of the heart, or we can study the entire respiratory system physiology, or entire excretory urinary system physiology, or entire cardiovascular physiology. So we can call them systemic physiology. And finally, pathophysiology is basically when your main, let's put it this way. So your system should work nicely, like a normal working condition. So if my body is working fine right now, that is my status or physiological status of the body in a normal condition. And that's called homeostasis, which is coming up next. So my homeostasis is when at a normal condition, whatever the physiological status of my body. So just saying that, let's say, because doctors and scientists study a lot of humans and they came up with, you know this, that's why I'm going to give you this example. Let's say your blood pressure should be 120/80. Average, obviously, you could be 110, somebody can be 121. That's not a big deal. So let's say if we consider, depending on our population, and when the doctor came up with a number after a lot of statistical data, let's say your heart rate should be 72 beats per minute. So let's say right now mine one is 72 beats per minute and my blood pressure is 120/80. That is my physiological status at a normal condition. It could be my heart rate is 70 beats per minute or 68. That's fine. That is my homeostasis. So my body is at ease. When body is not at ease, we call it disease. So if you follow the term, disease means our body is not at ease. That is pathophysiology, meaning molecular mechanism of disease. So let's say my blood pressure is right now 140. That means something is not right. What is not right, if you study that, that's pathophysiology. So molecular basis of disease, it's called pathophysiology. Okay. Again, homeostasis. So when you talked about homeostasis, means we are talking about like our body's normal physiological status. So right now, as I said, this is my body's normal physiological status. That's called homeostasis. So homeostasis is basically the normal physiological status of the body at rest. That's homeostasis. Now, let's say there is a change in the homeostasis. Or in other words, let's say there is some kind of change appears in my, hypothetically speaking, blood pressure. So what will happen? How body will react? So body will try to fix it. That's how they react. So for example, I'll give you another easier example. Let's say you are exercising, so you are running on a treadmill, and suddenly your body temperature goes up because your muscles are working, so you produce a lot of heat, so your body temperature goes up. How your body is going to react, because we know that we have to maintain a standard body temperature of, let's say, 98.5 degrees. If it goes up by 1 degree, your body enzymes are not going to work properly, so your body is going to start doing a lot of different things which your body doesn't like. So your homeostasis is disturbed. So when it is disturbed, they want to fix it. How they fix it? They have two mechanisms. One is called autoregulation. Another one is called extrinsic regulation. So autoregulation, or some book may call it as intrinsic regulation. The other one is extrinsic regulation. Okay, now what is this? So autoregulation is your body, that particular area, try to fix it. So I'll give another example to understand. So let's say I'm writing notes. So when I'm writing, taking notes while you're listening this lecture in the video. So you're trying to take notes, so your muscle here are working. So obviously when these muscle working, and they increase their demand of oxygen. So same thing, when you're running on a treadmill, your leg muscles are working, so they will increase the demand of oxygen because they want to make more energy. So what will happen is, locally, those areas will sense that okay, we need more oxygen in this area. So locally, these blood vessels will swell a little bit. So this blood vessel will dilate a little bit. So when they dilate, more blood can flow, more oxygen can be received by the cell. That's a local action. That's called autoregulation or intrinsic regulation. So locally, your leg muscles, blood vessels will swell a little bit or dilate a little bit. So that dilation will increase the blood flow. That will help to move more oxygen to that region. Okay. Now that may not be enough. Then this extrinsic does not mean outside the body. This extrinsic means outside that location. So not the leg. Right now, your other system can come into the picture. There are two other systems which are known as regulatory system. One is called nervous system. The other one is called endocrine system. So that deals with the hormones. So nervous system and endocrine system. Nervous system in this case, just remember right now, the main location, the main control center of the nervous system is your brain and spinal cord. Okay, so that area, or all the glands that produce hormones, they're going to be active. Now they're going to take over that damage. So they are going to do something, either the nervous system or endocrine, depending on what homeostatic changes you have, is going to jump on it. So in this particular example, the nervous system will work because they will send the signal to your heart. So they say, hey, increase the rate, because some part of your body is demanding more oxygen. So heart rate will increase. At the same time, your breathing will increase. And then you know that you can still running on a treadmill, but then you breathing a little bit higher, your heart is pumping more blood, so that your leg muscles are now satisfied with their oxygen demand. That's how you control the homeostasis. So your homeostasis is just the physiological status at the resting condition. When it changes, you want to fix it. How to fix it? Either intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic or autoregulation, that happens locally. Extrinsic, that happens externally. Externally does not mean outside your body. Externally means external to that location. I'll give another example. Let's say something happened in New York City. Normally it happens, we call 911. As soon as we call 911 and say, hey, we have an emergency right here in this location. Let's say it's City Tech. We have an emergency right here. Or let's say in an institute or in a club, wherever you are. So let's say we have a problem right here. So what they will do, then they will send cop, like NYPD there. And then when the NYPDs are here, they think, okay, this problem is bigger than what we thought. I can't handle it. So we need help from the federal government. Actually, the best example we can give you based on COVID. Unfortunately, when in the month of April and the beginning or late March, when we had such a bad reaction of COVID in New York City, state ultimately couldn't do it. Then they require for federal help. So if you think the state or the city, first think about city. The city could not do it. So city is the auto-regulation. Then they require federal help. That's the extrinsic regulation. Everything happening in the same country, everything happening in the same body. That's what homeostasis is. So homeostasis is when your body is at normal condition, anything changes, they. Now the question is, now we understand that, yes, they fix it. Now the question, how they do it, is a three-step process. It's literally a three-step process. It is exactly like this. So let's say I have an emergency. Right now I'm in my home. I have an emergency. So normally what do we do in an emergency? We call. So we call a specific number, 911. So let's say I have a small fire. So I call 911. So I will call 911. The person who is receiving is not coming to extinguish the fire. That person's job is to get the message and then send into the control center. So the person is going to receive the message. We can call that person a receptor. And that person is going to convey that message to a control center who will decide based on the emergency. Let's say if it is fire, then they will send a fire department. If it is any criminal or other kind of activity, then they will send a police department. If it is a medical emergency, then they'll send a health department. So that control center is the one that deciding what to do. And then the one that is coming is totally different. Either the cop comes or the fire department comes or the health officials comes, like the EMT people comes, depending on the emergency. So they are the one that affected, they're the one that executing the job. So you have 3-point system: receptor who receive the message, control center who control the message, like what to do depending on the message, and then effector is the one that executing the job. Same thing with the homeostasis. So how do you, 3 independent components, how they control the mechanism? Receptor, control center, effectors. So receptor receive the changes, they get the stimulus, they're thinking like what is happening. Control center, they determine what to do, and effector who does the job. So if it is doing through the nervous system, that's normally we call a short-term regulator. Anything short-term that has to be fixed literally now, the nervous system takes care. That's the control center. And endocrine, we call it a long-term regulator. So for example, nervous system deals with like your heart rate while exercising. On the other hand, your endocrine system deals with your growth, your digestion, because it's a long-term thing. So your nervous system takes care in the short-term regulation. Your endocrine system does the long-term regulation. Now, okay, we got this. So how it works again, one more time, this slide will explain to you exactly. So let's say anything control condition is monitoring by the receptor, any changes happen, they will send that to the control center determine what's happened, they send it to the effector does that job. So the response that then alert the control condition. So they do whatever they need to do. So they basically bring that condition back right here. So that's kind of a loop. That's kind of like a loop. Now, when you have this kind of loop, so the regulation can be also controlled. They have 2 kinds of loop. One is called negative loop, one is called positive feedback loop. Okay, so what does that mean? So let's understand this. So negative and positive feedback, let me explain this way. So let's say this room has an air conditioning machine, okay? Well, like many of our houses has. So then now think how it works. So when the room temperature is, let's say 80 degrees, I set up the thermostat at 70. So the machine, the air conditioning machine will throw the cold air. Throw the cold air until how long? Until the temperature of the room reaches 70, because I set it up that way. Once it reaches 70, the room temperature becomes 70, the machine will stop working because they don't need to throw any more cold because I want it 70. The thermostat will close at 70. Now imagine this is the way right now in the room. Now I'm breathing, I'm using iPhone, I'm using a computer, I have a refrigerator in this room, everything produces heat. And that heat will eventually, increase the temperature. When the temperature increases, thermostat senses that. They send this, that's a receptor. They send the signal to the machine starting throwing cold air. Now pay attention. The machine is starting because of the heat. Heat went up, so heat is asking to machine to start. And when machine started, they throw cold air. The cold air getting the heat down. So they are opposing the stimulus. So when this is the stimulus is the heat, and the machine is opposing or the negating the stimulus. That means they're reducing the heat. This is called negative feedback. Most of our body system is negatively controlled. Easy example, you are hungry. So as soon as your hunger center and the brain gets activated because you did not eat for a long time, you want food. Now what food does? Food suppress your hunger, meaning the food is negating the hunger. So that's negative feedback. Okay, you are running on a treadmill. Temperature goes up. Same thing as a AC machine. Temperature goes up. What that heat does, that heat switch on the sweat glands. So your sweat glands, which is regulated by hypothalamus, part of your brain, they're going to start sweating. What sweating does? Sweating reduces the heat. That is the function of a sweat. They reduce your body temperature. So your body temperature goes up, that switch turn on the sweat gland, which is a AC machine. Now sweating reduces the heat. So that's negative feedback. Blood sugar level. Your blood sugar level goes up. Body takes up all the sugar, then it goes down because body is using it. Then once it goes down, your body creates more hormone. That hormone increases that like a sugar reserve breakdown and increase your blood sugar level again. All of these, your blood pressure goes up, body does something which you are going to learn later on in the urinary system chapter also in detail, that reduces the blood pressure. So these are all negative feedback. Positive feedback, on the other hand, when stimulus activating the effector. So whatever the stimulus is telling them to do more. There are very few examples that at least at this point you will understand. One easy one is the normal childbirth. So initially the pregnant woman, the mother, will feel a little bit of pain, little bit of pain. Then that little bit of pain intensifies because that hormonal signal they're sending to the uterus, which produces the contraction so the child can be born. So that the initial pain, which is caused by that secretion or the contraction of the muscle because of that hormone, will keep increasing until the child is born. So that's positive feedback. Another example is the blood clotting. So when you get a cut, your blood clot comes out. So then blood send more blood at that area because they need more molecules which are required to produce the clot. So that initially it's a huge positive feedback. Okay? So this is the two mechanisms like how they maintain the homeostasis. One is negative feedback, one is positive feedback. This slide explains exactly what I said about the sweat gland. This one explains about the childbirth. And this one explains about the blood clot. So all these childbirth and blood clot is the positive example of positive feedback. The first one is the example of the negative feedback. Okay. So that's the first part. So our first part of the chapter, when you study, make sure you focus on the characteristics of living things, which is like organization, responsiveness, growth, movement, and then differentiation, all these things that we study. Then you should study the organization a little bit in more detail, like from the lower level to the upper level. So lower level starting with the atoms and molecules, then organelles to cell, then tissue, then organ system and organism. Once you finish that, go to the organ system, 11 organ system name you should know, detail not required. And then comes the anatomy and physiology, division of anatomy. What is anatomy? Division of anatomy. What is physiology? Division of physiology. Then you study homeostasis. Homeostasis, obviously, what is homeostasis? How do you regulate them? Autoregulation and extrinsic regulation. What is the mechanism? Receptors, control center, effector. And then finally, the control of that mechanism, meaning either negative feedback or positive feedback. okay, with few examples. That for positive feedback, those 2 examples are more than enough. And negative feedback, most of our body does the negative feedback. So that's the first half of the chapter. The second half, which is totally different thing. Second half, we are going to learn the terminology mostly that are used to study anatomy. So if you want to study the anatomy of the body, which eventually you study first before you study physiology, you need to know this terminology, okay? So first is the anatomical position. Make sure you memorize the definition. Body erect, or feet slightly apart, or you can say feet together, looking forward, arms on the side, palms upward, upward meaning like this, palms upward, and like this, palms upward, and thumb outward. Some book does not do the thumb outward thing. They just say palms upward, okay? So body straight in this, like this picture, feet slightly apart, arms on the side, looking forward. So you cannot look like this. So that is your anatomical position. So all this picture that you see, it's supposed to be the anatomical position when you're studying that. But now, even if you know the anatomical position, if I ask you a simple question, like, where is your heart located? As soon as you hear this question, most people say, oh, okay, my heart located somewhere here. True. But yet, let's say the person that you're explaining to is blind, cannot see, or vision impaired, or in a dark. So how do you explain that? It's not easy if you don't know some terminology. Okay, you may say it's in the thoracic cavity. It's in the chest. Which side in the chest? So if it's a left side, is it this side of the left side or the middle? So it's a lot of complication arises until we clarify them with some terminology. That is what we're going to learn now. So the first thing we're going to learn is called directional terminology. So directional terminology, or sometimes is referred to as comparative terminology. Okay, superior and inferior. Let's learn these 2 terms first. The superior is closer to the head, inferior is away from the head. Although these are not the real meaning of the word. This is the word we are going to use it to refer to that position. So let's say this is your heart located right over here, and your liver located somewhere in the abdomen. Okay, so this is your heart located, this is your liver located. So which one is closer to the head? This one is closer to the head. So we can say heart is superior than the liver. On the other hand, liver is inferior than the heart. Or we can say liver is superior than the kidney, because kidney is even below. So it is a directional or comparative terminology. So when you're comparing between 2 parts of the body, we cannot say heart is superior. We have to say heart is superior than the liver, because heart is inferior than your nose, because nose is closer to the head. So when we say heart is superior, we have to mention superior to whom. So heart is superior than the diaphragm, then it's fine. Anterior, posterior. Anterior is closer to the front. So anything towards your belly button, that's anterior. Anything towards the back is posterior. Excuse me. So towards the front, anterior, towards the back, posterior. So anything towards this, so the best example is this way. So let's say right here, you have a bone called sternum, the chest bone right here, sternum. So let's say my left hand, this hand is sternum, and on the back, this is vertebral column, this vertebral column. So where is your heart located? Your heart is somewhere here. So that's, the fist is my heart. So heart is right here. So if the heart is right here, they're back of the sternum. So I can say they're posterior to the sternum, or I can say heart is anterior to the vertebral column. This is the vertebral column on the back. So heart right here is anterior to the vertebral column, but heart is posterior to the sternum. That's how we use those 2 terminology. By the way, in human, ventral and dorsal is exactly same as anterior and posterior. You can literally use it interchangeably. Ventral means towards the belly, dorsal means towards the back. So we can say heart is ventral, Heart is dorsal to the sternum, heart is ventral to the vertebral column. We can say that. But when you move into a four-legged animal, so let's say you are doing a fetal pig dissection or fetal cat dissection, then you have to be very careful, because ventral and dorsal, pay attention to this one, ventral and dorsal, they are the literal meaning. Like ventral literally mean towards the belly. Dorsal literally means towards the back. But anterior and posterior does not mean that. Anterior and posterior, we are using that terminology in case of human. So as soon as you go to the four-legged animal, their ventral is their back and their dorsal is their belly. So back is on the top, belly is in the bottom. So the back then, because it's a four-legged animal, imagine a four-legged animal. So their back is towards the superior and the belly is the inferior. Then their anterior is their head and the posterior is their tail. So those terminology get changes. So in your book, you have a good picture about, they're just talking about an animal. I don't think I have that picture right now. So make sure you go and read that book and verify that one more time, because this for a human is fine, but this is not going to change in case of animal, but this is going to change in case of animal. Superficial and deep. Our body is like three-dimensional. So skin, whether it is here or on the back, the skin is superficial. Deep is the organ inside. So skin is superficial, muscle is deep. So muscle is deep compared to the skin. Okay, kidney is even deeper compared to the muscle. So superficial is when in the skin, all the way to the core of the body, that's deep. Left and right. Sounds extremely simple, but this is the most mistake. This is not your left and your right. This is the subject's left and subject's right. So if you're talking about my eye, this will be my right eye. This will be my right eye. This is my right hand. So this is my right hand. So if I'm the subject, if the question is which one the instructor right hand, that will be right hand. So whether I do this way or that way, that would be my right hand. So it's a left, it's a subject's left, and the right is a subject's right. So when you're looking at the heart model, later on, when you're looking at the lung model, you have to think about the subject's lung and subject's heart, not your lung, not your heart, not whatever your side is. You have to think about heart is what side of that subject. Medial and lateral. Medial is closer to the midline. Lateral is away from the midline. So from a nose, if you just imagine there is a straight line, so anything closer to that midline is medial. Anything away from the midline is lateral. So if you think about your eye, let's say this eye, the eye and the ear. So eye is medial compared to ear. Ear is towards the more lateral. Okay. There are two more terminology. I'm going to say it, make sure you write it down. When you study lateral and medial, I can introduce two more terminology. For example, eyes. So eyes are in two sides, or ear, they're equal distance to the midline. So it's very difficult if I say, where is your ear position compared to the other ear? So either you can say left and right, that's easy way of saying, or we can use two more terminology. One is called ipsilateral, IPSI lateral, ipsilateral. The other one is called contralateral, contra, C-O-N-T-R-A, contralateral. Ipsilateral is the same side of the midline. Contralateral, opposite side of the midline. So if this is the midline, so this is the midline. Let's say you're talking about this is the midline of the body. You're talking about a muscle here and a muscle there. Both muscle on the same side of the midline. We can call these muscles are ipsilateral. But these are contralateral. These hands or the eyes are contralateral because their midline is here. Eyes are equal distance from the midline. The two ears are contralateral, meaning they're two sides of the midline. Finally, proximal and distal. Proximal and distal refer to from the torso. So this is the torso. This area is the torso. So if you do not have any arm and leg attached, this area is the torso. So this is the torso right here. So if you forget about your arm and the leg, the remaining part of the body, which is right here, is called torso, or the trunk. It's called torso or the trunk. So from the arm, so if we let me see if I can catch this. So if you're looking at the arm, so this is where the body is attached. This is where the body is attached. Remember, arms are on the side. So anything here is proximal. Going away is distal. So if I think about my wrist and my elbow, the wrist will be distal compared to the elbow. Okay, and so on. So that is how we can use those two terminology. Okay, for example, knee is distal compared to the thigh. The thigh is closer to the body. So knee is distal, or ankle is distal compared to the knee, because ankle is even far away from the body. So those are the two terminology there. Okay, so this directional terminology will help you to understand the body a little bit more better. Then we are going to learn about body planes. Body planes is basically, these are imaginary plane. These are completely imaginary plane. So if you just imagine this, if I take a blade, let's say, imagine this is the blade, and if I put the blade right here, and if I cut my body like this, so if I put a blade right here and cut my body like this, I get two sides, the left and the right side. That plane, which goes through right here in the middle, this one, it's called sagittal plane. Sagittal plane. Now pay attention one more time. So if I take a blade and cut the body right here in the half, if I go right in the middle, producing equal half, we call mid-sagittal plane. But if I cut it right here, you're still going to make some left and the right side. So how many left and right side we can make? We can make infinite, like we can cut anywhere we want. So we can create lots of unequal division by cutting the body anywhere we want, but the same way, we call that parasagittal. So sagittal plane basically divides the body into right and left. If I go only in the middle, that means you have one mid-sagittal plane, and the remaining not on the midline, it could be anywhere, that's called parasagittal. Okay, that's sagittal. So sagittal plane, divide your body into left and the right side. Frontal or coronal plane. Frontal cuts this way. So if I have a blade cutting this way, I produce the anterior and the posterior, or like ventral and the dorsal. Again, infinite number, because there is nothing in the middle on this side. So if I cut something here, I can produce the front and the back. That infinite number of that plane is called frontal or coronal plane. Right here, frontal or coronal plane, they're going this way. So they're cutting the body into anterior and posterior. And finally, transverse. If I cut the body right here, so you get superior and inferior. So if I take this plane and cut the body right here, so if I get a superior half and an inferior half, again, there is nothing in the middle. So you get infinite number of that plane. We call that transverse plane. Transverse, or some book called horizontal plane. So transverse or the horizontal plane are very commonly used to produce cross section. So when you're going to study later on in the, let's say, many other chapter, let's say you're going to study cross section of the liver, cross section of bone, cross section of hair, cross section of skin, cross section of lung. That cross section means that thin slice is being produced using a transverse or horizontal plane. So if you take this, it's like when you're making a salad, you're cutting the cucumber horizontally. So you're creating a thin slice of cucumber. That's cross section. So you're taking this, you're cutting this way. That's producing cross section. Okay, so you have three body planes. Imaginary again, sagittal plane, again, innumerable number of parasagittal, only one in the middle, mid-sagittal, because that's equal half. Innumerable number of frontal and coronal, divides the body into front and the back, or posterior and the anterior. Transverse plane, again, innumerable number, is a superior and inferior. Body cavities. So body cavities, like there are two body cavities. So one is called dorsal cavity, the other one is called ventral cavity. So if you look from the side, so if I go around this way, if I look from the side, the crania and the spinal cord, where the spinal cord is is the spinal cavity, or some book called it vertebral canal. So together is the dorsal cavity. Again, the same word. Dorsal means towards the back. Ventral means towards the front. So dorsal cavity consists of this cranial cavity where your brain is, and the spinal cavity where your spinal cord is. In this picture, yellow color, that's your dorsal cavity, cavity on the back. Cavity in the front is called ventral cavity. Ventral cavity consists of two, thoracic cavity and abdominopelvic cavity. Together we call this ventral cavity. Thoracic cavity on the chest and abdominopelvic cavity, abdomen and pelvic together, because there is no such difference. Here the diaphragm is making these two, because the diaphragm muscle is a dome-shaped muscle which clear this position and they make two distinctive cavities. But there is this just line indicating that's your pelvic area, but that line does not exist. So it's a one single cavity we call abdominopelvic cavity. Abdominopelvic cavity has another name called peritoneal cavity, important to remember because there is a membrane coming up named based on that. Okay. So dorsal cavity is cranial and spinal, ventral cavity is thoracic, and abdominopelvic cavity. Now what is these cavities are? These are the cavities which filled with organ in your body right now. So right here you have the brain, right here you have the spinal cord, right here you have the lung and the heart, right in the abdomen you have tons of organs. So these organs are filled in that cavity. Okay, these are called body cavity. These body cavities are not nasal cavity or oral cavity or ear cavity. These are not those. These are the cavities which actually filled with organs. Now, if you look from the front, this is what you see. So we can study a little bit more about the thoracic cavity here. Thoracic cavity is a one whole big cavity above the diaphragm, but it can be subdivided into three groups. There are two, one here and one here. These are the two pleural cavities where your lungs are. So two pleural cavity house your lungs. Now pay attention. In the middle, this whole area, where just imagine there are two cavities and two lungs, nothing else. The middle portion, we call it mediastinum. Now within that mediastinum, they built another cavity and they put the heart right there. Cavity means like a room in this case, because these are thin layer of membrane. This is thin layer of membrane. Those membranes, I'm going to mention their name a little bit later. The membrane creating a room. So in the thoracic cavity area, there are three rooms, two for the lungs and one for the heart. So this for your right lung, this is for your left lung. Remember, left and right of the subject. This is the right lung, that's the left lung. And that's right in between those two lungs, you have the heart. So this cavity is called right pleural cavity, left pleural cavity, and this is called pericardial cavity, because this is around the heart. Pericardial, so where is your heart located? That's the first question I asked. This is actually the answer. Pericardial cavity within the mediastinum. So when you're in ANP2, that question will be helpful. Like in cardiovascular system, where is the location of heart? Pericardial cavity within the mediastinum, because the whole thing is the mediastinum. By the way, this is not a cavity. This is just a shoot. It's like two rooms in the hallway. That's a hallway. This is abdominopelvic cavity together, or peritoneal cavity. So there are lots of organs like small intestine, large intestine, kidneys, ureter, pancreas, gallbladder, stomach, liver, so many organs. So we need to understand that cavity a little bit better. Although this is one single cavity, but how can we understand that a little bit better? So you can read this. This is the understand a little bit better, because we can divide that. There are two ways. Either you can divide them in this 9, or divide them into easy 4 ways. So 4 ways is like this. So it's like y-axis and x-axis. Any book will have that. I don't have a slide here. So x-axis and y-axis, if you cut that, you create 4 quadrant. So if you have one line here in the middle, one line here in the middle, you cut upper quadrant, left side, left upper quadrant, right upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant. That you can do 4 division easily. A lot of book has that. Make sure you know that. Just y-axis and x-axis quadrant. Or you can make this 9 division. So in the middle, That area we call umbilical region. You can remember this easy way. This is your belly button. It is attached, there is a cord attached to the mother during the birth. Umbilical cord, we all know that. Umbilical region, easily remember. On the top, we call it epigastric. Epi means top, hypo means bottom. So using the word gastric, we use both top, bottom, because gastro means something to do with stomach. So right here is your stomach area. So epigastric, bottom, hypogastric, or pubic region. Then if you know the one side, you automatically know the other side. So that's like lumbar. When I'm sitting in a chair, that's my lumbar support. And the chair, that is actually called lumbar support. So that's supporting my lumbar region. So that's my lumbar, right lumbar and left lumbar. And this is groin, or we can call it iliac, because that bone is iliac bone, or inguinal region. Inguinal means groin. So this is left inguinal region, right inguinal region. And on the top, finally, hypochondriac. I'm explaining each word so that will help you to memorize this. So you have to draw that at home. You have to write down those names a couple of times, then only you can memorize this. Hypochondriac, hypo means below, chondriac, the word came because you see these are rib cage, so this is rib bones, but right here, when the rib bone comes, you can check another good quality picture. These area are cartilage. This is the bony area. Chondriac, something to do with cartilage. Like chondrocyte is the cell in the cartilage. So hypochondriac below the cartilage, because this area is slightly below the cartilage. That's why they use the word. So this is called left hypochondriac. That's right hypochondriac region. So again, right in the middle, umbilical region. On the top, like superior to the umbilical region is epigastric, inferior to the umbilical region, hypogastric, and so on. Now, when you study this, why did I give this picture? Because when you study this, just an example, for example, I will not ask you, where is urinary bladder located? Because technically urinary bladder, so when you, let's say, practice some question in the back of the book, or you're practicing using the third-party app, let's say for Quizlet, they can ask this question, because they can ask literally, where is your urinary bladder located? So your answer, right answer is in the hypogastric region, but I will not ask this question because I did not teach you urinary bladder yet. These are all organs from the digestive system. I can ask you, where is gallbladder located? No, because that is an organ in the digestive system. So I don't want you to know all the organ system. What I want you to know, like, what is the immediate superior region of left iliac region? That kind of question. So what is the immediate superior region of the left iliac region? Immediate superior, your answer should be left lumbar. Or I can say, what are the immediate lateral region of umbilical region? Could be this, could be that. That kind of question I can. Which one is the inferior to umbilical region? This is immediate inferior